Hello, hello. How you doing? We're all... Are we all surviving? Everyone's cool? Everyone's happy? Okay. By the way, in case you don't know, there are Segway rides downstairs. If you haven't taken advantage of them, it's a ton of fun. We have Segway guides who will show you how to ride these crazy contraptions and not kill yourselves. That's on the second floor, all kinds of other activities going on. A few minor schedule things to throw you away. Everything's going nice and normally, so just want to tell you of a couple of things that aren't going quite as normally as they should. The panel that was just on now, just wasn't on now actually, fiber optics panel on blue boxing, the return of blue boxing, I guess. That has been rescheduled to 8 o'clock tonight in this room. Now, I know some of you might say, well, where the fuck is Kevin Mitnick? He's supposed to be on 8 o'clock tonight. And you're right, he is. But the last we heard, we've actually been following this story for a couple of days now, Kevin was in Colombia, and he got very sick down there and was in a hospital. And we don't believe he's made it back to the States as of yet. So it doesn't look like he's going to be on that panel. There's a slight chance he'll be here tomorrow, but for right now, we have to assume that he's still in a hospital in Colombia, and hopefully safe in Colombia. We'll keep you updated. Fiber optics blue box panel will be right on after the Hackers in Prison panel, scheduled for 7 o'clock. Also, another scheduling change. Yesterday, we had a panel scheduled for 9 o'clock, alienation and engagement over in Area B, and that had to be canceled because an airplane got diverted with the person on it who was supposed to be on that panel. That's going to be taking place at 6 o'clock in Area B in place of the quantum, crypto, and computation talk, which has been canceled due to a power outage in Queens. I shit you not. The city is crumbling all around us. I don't know if anybody has noticed. Don't ask me. I don't know. Okay, that's the minor stuff. Here's something a little bit bigger. We're all gathered here today for Privacy is Dead, Get Over It, and that is taking place. But with a little caveat. How do I say this? Okay, well, as some of you know, I don't know if anybody was at the Polarium seminar, which was taking place on the 6th floor. It wasn't actually part of the Hope Conference. It was something that was going on at the same time. It was sort of a mini conference being led by Steven Rambam, the private investigator who has been at every single one of our Hope conferences and knows an awful lot about these things. And it went very well. We had seminars, very intensive seminars that went for, I think, 8 in the morning until about 4 o'clock. Well, right after it ended at 4 o'clock, rather quietly and without much fuss, these two guys came up behind Steve, asked him if he had any weapons, and identified themselves as the FBI. The last thing we saw was Steve being led away in handcuffs. So, yeah, it's. Oh, I want to tell you what's going on so that no rumors get started. That's what we know. That's what we know. And we're going to try to find out. Of all the people in this place, he's the last person I would expect to get arrested. He's the one that would be arresting others. But I mean, we're talking about somebody who hunts down Nazis all over the world and is just great at finding people. And I guess he found the wrong person, or they found him, or something. So that's going to obviously affect this panel. We have the people here who are going to be on the panel, and they're fascinating people. They're experts in all sorts of cool things like polygraph machines and databases and things like that. So they're going to tell you their stories and experiences and take your questions. And we're going to find out where Steve is, hopefully get him here somehow, and we'll keep you updated. But in the meantime, I want to introduce Jerry Keenan, Reginald Montgomery, and Kelly Riddle, who will be taking Privacy is Dead. Get over it. Take care.
Well, we're as surprised as y'all are by it. So I actually was doing the last seminar on surveillance, of all things. And as things would have it, just as I was finishing my talk, people were coming up asking questions. The back door opened, and 4 guys in blue coats with the big FBI on it came in. And if you know Steve, you know that he is flamboyant. So at first I thought, it's PR, you know. And so I kept on with the questions and everything else, and they asked him to step out in the hallway. placed the handcuffs on him and started to lead him off. And Reggie was there, so he got the attorney's number and Steve's parents' number, and Steve said, "Call him for me." So it ain't no joke. Why? Who knows? You know. I will tell you, Steve and I go way back. Just so you'll know, I am Kelly Riddle, and in your packet, I'm number 77. I'm from San Antonio. I own a private investigation company there. I have about 40 employees that work for me. We do a lot of international work, a lot of everything from pre-employment all the way through bug sweeps, electronic bug sweeps. We do a lot of corporate investigations, just about anything you can do in this particular field. I've written 10 books. Like Steve, I've been on most of the TV shows, et cetera, et cetera. I will tell you that Steve had a good presentation. His computer and all of the things that he left behind were ushered out of here, as you can imagine. So I saw briefly the presentation, and he basically had 500 pages of documentation that he had taken off of databases, the internet, and other sources on this gentleman right here, Rick, who agreed to be the target. So it was going to be quite fascinating. He even had aerial photographs of Rick, his house, and a close-up of Rick, among other things. So what we're going to do is fill the time. We all, respectively, do the same thing. Steve had the PowerPoint presentation and was going to do the majority of this. So we will answer your questions, but in the meantime, I'm going to let these guys introduce themselves, and then if you have questions, we'll be happy to take them.
Okay, I'm Jerry Keenan. Kelly does surveillance stuff. I'm an expert in military records. I can find anything that has to do with the military. Not just the American military, but I also can get information on military personnel from the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Russia, and the French Foreign Legion. And the Legion, by the way, still adheres to Legion names. In other words, when you enlist, you can take another name. So in order to find someone, you have to have their real name. Other than that, I also have known Steve for a while, and I'm just as confused as everybody else. But these things happen. What's the matter? Nobody hear me out there? Oh, okay. Don't want to cover my ugly mug, huh? So that's basically what I will be doing. I'll give you some case histories that I've worked. I get a lot of pleasure out of busting frauds and wannabes, by the way. I'm a 20-year Navy veteran myself with 5 years with Naval Security and Investigative Command as a civilian, and I spent 25 years in Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa without a break. That was constant. I did come back here about 20 years ago, so I've been retired for a while. So if anybody has any questions, I'll answer them when we're getting ready to. In the meantime, hand you over to Reggie.
Good evening. My name is Reggie Montgomery. I'm a private investigator like these other two gentlemen, the one they took away in handcuffs. I don't know if that's good right now, but it is. It is what it is. My forte, or one of them, is polygraph and interview. Basically, my practice consists of corporate investigations and criminal defense investigations. So I guess I'll have to talk to Steve soon. These guys were serious. You know, at first we thought it was a joke. It was not a joke. If you want to visit Steve over the weekend, he'll be at 26 Federal Plaza. I guess he's going to be waiting for an arraignment on Monday and a bail amount to be posted by a judge. As these gentlemen did their respective specialties, I did a bit on polygraph as an investigative tool. Throughout my 27 years of running polygraph examinations and doing interview and interrogations, well, we call it interview now, it's not interrogation. I've amassed a record of over $30 billion in recovered, stolen, or misappropriated property. So you may have some questions about that. A lot of these things were big cases that were intellectual property was stolen, and through the use of polygraph and interview process and other investigative techniques, we were able to recover these losses. So you may have some questions about that from time to time. I also wrote a book on corporate investigations and have written a couple chapters for criminal defense investigation books. So I don't know how many more of you guys are going to get taken out of here in handcuffs, but you may need a criminal defense investigator at some time. I know I was anxious to come here because you guys are smart. It's scary how smart you are. Some of the things that I read in this little book that we get for Hope 6, I'm going, what are they saying? I don't even know what the topic is or how I would listen. So obviously you guys are smart. I know in our instructions for the speakers, they said, speak to these people like they're sophisticated. So I guess I'm going to have to do that because you're way over my head. We have tools that we use in investigations that some of them are more available to you than they are to us. Because other than reading my email and trying to figure out my contact list, I'm pretty screwed up with my computer. So if any one of you guys, and I'm looking for volunteers or ladies, would like to help me make my life easier using computers, I would like that. Although Steve tried that, look what it got him. So I don't know if, maybe I don't want that. But if you have any volunteers or you want to talk to me, ask me any questions, please. I'd love to answer all your questions. Thank you.
Okay, and with that, if you have any questions, shout them out. But yes. Mike, we have a mic. Do we have a mic? Hold on.
Microphone.
Do we have a mic in the house?
Oh, does mine work? I guess it is.
Okay.
It's my impression that the polygraph tests are only permitted in certain instances. What's the reason it's not permitted in others, and what are those instances where it is or is not permitted?
Reg?
Well, depends on what you want to use it for. First of all, it's not polygraphy or calligraphy. It's a polygraph exam. And it's allowed in a lot of circumstances. There's not many it isn't allowed in. What, do you have an example?
It's just my impression.
Actually, that's the biggest misnomer of them all. It is admissible in court. It's admissible under stipulation if you are charged with a crime, which many of us may be at some point in time, and you know you are innocent. You can ask your attorney to have a polygraph exam run of you. I would do that with your own polygraph examiner before you went to the law enforcement examiner. If in fact you are truthful and your polygraph backs that up, you can go to the prosecutor or the prosecuting entity and ask them for what's called a stipulated polygraph. So you're right, it wouldn't be admissible in that situation either. What would happen is if the prosecutor or the district attorney or whoever the prosecutorial arm is agrees to that, and you prove to them that you passed the polygraph, there won't be any charges. The charges will be dropped. So therefore, it's not admitted in that particular situation, but it could be admitted as long as it's stipulated to in a trial at the time.
It's my impression that employers, as I am one, is not permitted to routinely do polygraph exams of employees when there's no investigation.
That's correct.
Okay, what's the reasoning? What would be the purpose
There was a
of
law
prohibiting
passed in
that?
1988. It's the Employee Polygraph Protection Act of 1988.
That's what I'm getting at. What's the reason for that?
The reason for that is politicians got this bill passed, and a president signed it who was under pressure to sign it because if he didn't, he would have been prosecuted for the Contra scandal. President Reagan came into office and was the biggest proponent of polygraph that we've ever seen in the White House. He wanted all the CIA agents, FBI agents, and all our politicians, elected officials, polygraphed. It wasn't very popular at the time. Because the polygraph at that point was in its heyday and was working very well. Through the early 1980s, we had a lot of cases like Tylenol. I did a couple like straight pins and the cheese doodles. Let's see, what was another one? How about porno books in the Cracker Jack's prize system? That was a good one. And in order to eliminate suspects, we used a polygraph. And it's a great way to eliminate suspects. If you have 500 or 600 people in a factory and any one of them had the availability to do one of these things, we could eliminate them very quickly as suspects. So that was in the early 80s. By the mid-80s, when Ollie North was under the gun and swallowing his sword for his president and his country, a guy by the name of Kennedy, I think his name was Ted, who didn't like polygraph very much. Apparently there was a thing in Chappaquiddick and polygraph. And, So what happened was Ted, who was pressured, he didn't come up with this by himself. He rarely does come up with things by himself. He was pressured by big labor because big labor didn't like polygraphs because their people were being polygraphed around the country and being fired wholesale for theft and whatever because of polygraph examinations. They come up with this Employee Polygraph Protection Act. And what that act calls for is no more pre-employment or continued employment polygraphs, which is referred to as periodic. In other words, you would come into a factory or to a jewelry store as a classic example. How many diamonds have you stolen since we last polygraphed you? That type of thing. That was eliminated. And the pre-employment polygraph was eliminated, except for, guess who? Government, anything to do with armored cars, security officers, banks, things like that. Those were eliminated, taken out of that bill. So for all intents and purposes, Big Labor and Big Kennedy got his way and pretty much destroyed the polygraph industry. But now the polygraph industry has taken a new turn. What they're using polygraph for is testing for recidivism rates in child molesters and sexual offenders in many states out west. In order to stay out of jail or get out of jail, convicted felons, child molesters, sexual offenders have to take periodic polygraphs. Every month or two, they have to come in and answer questions about their sexual activities for the period before.
Thank you.
That's where polygraph's going now.
Let me answer that a little bit, because I think in the employment realm, what you're getting at is you can't single out an employee. So in other words, if you've got internal theft going on, and it happens to be in a particular room, you have to investigate everyone that had access to that room before you can start asking them to take a polygraph. And then you have to give them sufficient time. It varies state to state, 42 hours, 72 hours. Give them notice that they're to appear at a certain location for a polygraph, and you give them that time frame in order to seek legal advice.
The federal law actually calls for a 48-hour period after they're requested to take a polygraph. Before you can ask anybody to take a polygraph now, and for a specific loss even, you have to interview them and make sure that they're a real possibility and a real suspect before you can even ask them to take a polygraph. They have 48 hours notice at that point, written notice, before you can even polygraph them. They can have their lawyer present, their rabbi, their priest, their wife, their mother, whoever they want, for the pre-test interview. After the pre-test interview, the polygraph examiner and the subject do the test. For the post-test interview, you can have a representative available also. But that's basically how the law works.
Thank you. The gentleman wants to know about court's compelling test.
I'm sorry?
The gentleman wants to know about the court's compelling.
Courts can compel tests, and I've been ordered by courts to test people for the judge. The judge wants to know, and they have put in a court order that one party or the other or both have to take polygraph tests regarding a particular question.
Thanks again.
You recommended, if you're going to volunteer to take a polygraph test, that you get your own examiner and not trust the law enforcement agencies. So the implication I'm sensing here is that there are methods for an examiner to use that will skew the results in the direction that they want them to go. Is that correct? And if so,
That is absolutely correct.
could you give some examples?
The examiner can make the test go either way because it's subjective. This is not, it's somewhat scientific in that the instrumentation we use, a polygraph is no more than a recording device. It records your body functions, your bodily functions, your physiological reactions to questions, to stimuli. If I put a gun to Jerry's head, Jerry's going to react. Whether he moves or not, or he looks like he's reacting to you, his body functions are going to react.
I'll probably have to change my underwear.
Are there also wide, shall we say, differences of opinion in interpretation of test results?
Not for polygraph examiners that are trained and have the education and keep up with their education. In order to even go to polygraph school, you have to have a bachelor's degree. You have to have 5 years investigative experience. It's an 8-week intensive program and a 26-week, what do they call it?
OJT?
It's really an on-the-job type of thing where you have to do 25 tests within that 6 months that are closely watched by your instructor to make sure you're doing everything properly. And it's quite intensive. The biggest thing in a polygraph test is the polygraph examiner has to psychologically set the subject to make them aware that this works and it will work with them. And that's done in a number of ways.
Thank you.
Hey, I don't know if this is a real question or more of a topic. When you were talking about investigating people in different armies, soldiers, things like that, I was thinking about the soldiers in Iraq who aren't, belonging to a country, that are kind of like the outsourced soldiers that we hear about. Have you gotten into that at all, or have worked on any of those cases? Or
You talking about the Mercs or?
yeah.
Well, most of them are former military, and the bulk of them are American and British. Because the Americans and the Brits have the largest private military, well, they don't call them mercenaries anymore, they're now called private military companies. Yeah, go figure. But I guess they don't want to confuse them with Mercedes-Benz by calling them Mercs, So, yeah, they sometimes I have had to find people like that. Technically speaking, I'm not an investigator. What I do is I'm basically your expert in military research and military records, and I do help locate people, which is why private investigators come to me, because military records research is actually a maze. Anybody looking for it, most investigators and most private citizens know that you can get a person or a veteran's records from St. Louis, Missouri. However, as I pointed out in my little speech this morning, there are over 160 locations in this country where you can find military records, and you're not always going to find what you're looking for in St. Louis. The trick is knowing where they are and how to find them and why they're there. So some of these people, if they've gotten out, they're veterans, and they join a private military company, I usually find the information on them from their military career, turn it over to the private investigator, who then tries to track them down, although I can locate military personnel. But these private companies, they're not military personnel, they are not under military control. You would have to do an investigation on them, just like you would have to do an investigation on any employee of any private company, because that's what they are. They're employees of private companies. So you have to find an employment search, basically, is what it is.
Hi, my question is for Mr. Keenan. Are you any way affiliated with AuthentiSeal, which is the...
Let's just say I know them.
You know them?
Them and a few other SEALs, and I'm in really tight with the British SAS as well.
Perfect. And my next question would be, for someone who's actually interested in private investigation as a further career, what kind of tips could you give someone in the crowd that would be to start out in that sort of career? What kind of education would you start from, or what's a good starting platform?
Well, one of the things most people will always tell you is read, read, read. Then take courses, too. I used to teach, even though I'm not a private investigator, for about 11 years, I taught private investigation for the Board of Cooperative Education Services for the state of New York. I'm also a certified security guard instructor for the state. But I never bothered going out to get, my PI license because for a while there, and because the other side of my business is counterterrorism and terrorism research, which, as you might guess, keeps me a little bit busy these days, I just didn't have the time. I could not do any investigative work because, if you're going on surveillance, that's 8 hours that I might be needed somewhere else for something else. So I never did. So I just do the military research and counterterrorism. But there's courses you can take. And one thing I have to tell you, because a lot of people were under this misconception, even students of my own, when they came into my class, were under the same misconception about this. You cannot become a private investigator and get a license simply by attending a course, even if it's accredited. For instance, the state of New York requires 3 years of field service before you can even take the test. They don't care if you got a master's degree.
So it's kind of like an apprenticeship program with an existing investigator?
Basically, yeah, except you're getting paid for it.
Okay, thank you.
Hey guys, thanks for coming. I was wondering what kind of methods, whether non-technical or technical, both in the military side as well as just general PI, you guys use to gather the information you do. Is it still through the mail and by fax, or are a lot more of them databases now? I'm sure probably on the PI side they are, and maybe not so much on the military side. What kind of technology, since we have more of a technical crowd, do you guys use to gather that information?
Well, I'll be honest with you, in the military end of things, it's as low-tech as it gets, because they have never and they will never put military personnel files on a database. All military records are paper files.
Right.
However, there is a website out there that you can go to that you used to have to fax in and get on the feds list and everything else, but they've now made it so you can just go to the website, and if you have the person's name, social security number, you enter that in and it will tell you if they're active duty or not.
Now, you said they don't store that information on data.
I know the company he's talking about because I work for them.
Okay.
I
Now-
provide a lot of their info.
You said they only do it on paper for military records. What about situations with the VA laptop and other situations?
Okay, that's a database of an entirely different color.
Okay.
That type of database is for VA claims. If you make it's separate from it's separate from the Department of Defense. It's the Department of Veterans Affairs, which is different. I mean, even though they may seem as if they're the same thing, they're two separate entities.
Is that a citizen organized?
Yeah, well, the VA has always had problems, trust me. And they have all these names on there because if you make a VA claim, the VA opens a record on you. Obviously, any company like that would that's handing out any kind of benefits. They want to know who you are and what you're doing and why you're making the claim. At the same time, active duty personnel, their families are also eligible for a lot of these benefits. So that's why there's dependents information on that stolen, or was on that stolen database. Found out that I was on it. My wife was a 21-year Navy veteran. She was on it. My son from my first marriage is on that is on that same thing because we all got out after a certain date. I think it was 75. Anyone who got out after 75 is in that database.
On the PI side, are there more technical databases now?
Yes.
Other than mail?
Yeah.
Could you describe any, not specifically what the sources are, the companies or anything,
Well,
but what methods? I mean, is it a database structure? Is it, just a client application that you download? What do you guys use?
There's a lot of databases out there that you can use, and sometimes I use them in conjunction with military stuff too when I'm trying to locate somebody. Because if it's a military person who's stationed in the States, 9 times out of 10 they're going to have a civilian address. So you're going to have to locate them the same way as you locate anyone else. A lot of them are just, you type in certain information, they'll ask you for certain information. You can do a search by telephone number, street address, by name, by all three. Type it in there, and it'll come up is if there's a change in the address, or if that person is still there. And then there's another one, Ancestry.com. I'm sure most of you have heard of that one. They have a social security number death index. You can go into the SSDI there. I think they charge for it, but I don't know how much, and find out when a person died.